Welcome to today's Explainer. We're breaking down a really critical exam scenario on professional liability today. If you're studying for the NPPE, the National Professional Practice Examination, or honestly, even if you're just out there in the field and want to know where your legal blind spots are, you are in the exact right place. I absolutely love diving into these scenarios because they take all that dry, abstract legal jargon and ground it right in the messy, real-world situations we deal with on job sites every single day.
Here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start with the exam question, jump into the core legal concepts, reveal the correct answer, do a trap hunt to avoid those tricky, incorrect options, review some essential terminology, and then wrap it all up with a final takeaway.
All right, Section 1, the exam question. Let's decode the scenario.
Let me read this out exactly as it appears on the test, because understanding every single word here is absolutely crucial. The scenario goes, a professional voluntarily assumes additional site review duties beyond contract scope. How is liability assessed? I want you to pay incredibly close attention to two phrases, voluntarily assumes and beyond contract scope. The exam designer is handing you a very specific set of variables here. They want to know what happens to your legal risk when you decide, totally of your own free will, to do something helpful that you were literally never hired to do in the first place. So your options are A, strictly by the written contract, B, based on the standard of care applicable to the assumed services, C, only if the client paid additional fees, or D, only if the assumption was in writing. Just take a quick second and try to formulate your own guess. Which one feels right to you? Lock it in before we unpack the theory behind this.
Moving right along to Section 2, core legal concepts. Let's diagnose the theory.
This question is pulling straight from civil liability and engineering law. What the question designer is really trying to measure here is your grasp of tort law versus contract law. Specifically, they're checking if you realize that your professional obligations to the public and to your client don't just magically vanish because a task wasn't typed out in your original proposal. Civil liability is all about your duty to not cause harm through negligence, right? And that duty is there whether you're operating inside your contract or stepping outside of it.
So, the absolute backbone of this question is the standard of care. Basically, this is the level of competence and practice expected of a reasonable professional under similar circumstances. It applies anytime you perform professional services. Think of it as this invisible measuring stick that a judge or disciplinary committee uses to evaluate your work. If you step onto a site and act as an engineer, a geoscientist, or an architect, the law expects you to act like a reasonably prudent professional in that specific field, period.
This sets up a classic conflict that the exam loves to test: the rigid boundaries of your written contract versus the actual reality of what you're doing on site. We naturally want to think our contract is this impenetrable fortress. We tell ourselves, hey, if it's not in the contract, I'm not responsible for it. But reality is a lot more fluid than that. You see a problem on site, you point it out. Maybe you give some casual advice on how to fix it, and bam, suddenly you've crossed from a contract duty over to an assumed duty. This question is testing if you know exactly how the law treats that crossover.
Okay, Section 3, the correct answer. Let's do the reveal. If you locked in option B earlier, you hit the nail on the head. The correct answer is B, based on the standard of care applicable to the assumed services. Let's break down exactly why this is the legally correct answer so you truly understand the mechanics of it.
The logic is actually beautifully straightforward, even if it feels a little intimidating when you're actually out on a job. The absolute second you decide to perform a professional task, even if you're just volunteering, even if you're just trying to be a team player, the law expects you to do it right. Liability follows your professional actions. If you give professional advice, you're held to professional standards, completely regardless of your original scope. By expanding your actions, you are automatically expanding your liability. The law's stance is pretty simple. If you're going to do it, you must do it correctly.
Let's move to Section 4, avoiding exam traps, where we dismantle the incorrect options.
This is honestly my favorite part, the trap hunt. We're going to systematically break down the wrong answers so you can see exactly how the test writers are trying to trip you up. We've got the paper shield myth, the free work myth, and the unwritten loophole. Exam writers absolutely love exploiting these common real-world misunderstandings. You know, figuring out why an answer is wrong is often way more educational than just knowing which one is right. So let's look at each one.
Let's start with Trap A, which says liability is assessed strictly by the written contract. This relies on what we call the paper shield myth. It's this wildly common assumption that your written contract magically protects you from negligence if you decide to start doing extra stuff on site. But a contract only governs what you agreed to do originally. It does not give you some sort of immunity for torts or negligence you commit while doing extra things outside that agreement. Your contract is a foundation. It is not a shield.
Then we have Trap C, only if the client paid additional fees.
This one is so incredibly tempting because in our everyday lives, we link obligation with getting paid, but the law totally disagrees. This is the free work myth. Remember, the duty of care is owed to the public and the client based on your status as a professional, not based on your invoice. If you do the work for free, out of the absolute goodness of your heart, but you do it poorly, you still hold 100% of the liability for those damages.
And finally, Trap D. Only if the assumption was in writing. Please do not fall for this unwritten loophole. A lot of people think if it isn't documented and signed in triplicate, it doesn't count legally. False. Your physical actions, your verbal instructions to a contractor on site, even a quick passing email, all of these can establish that you assumed a duty of care. Paper or no paper, your conduct dictates your liability.
All right, Section 5, Essential Terminology. Let's build up that glossary.
To make sure you're fully prepared and speaking the exact same language as the examiners, let's lock down a few key terms from this scenario. First up, liability. In the context of this exam, liability is basically a direct reflection of your professional footprint on a project. It is your legal responsibility for your acts and, critically, your omissions. Simply put, if you take on a task, you own the consequences of doing it poorly.
Next is contract scope. This refers to the explicit boundaries and tasks you agreed upon in a formal, written contract. Your contract scope is your starting point. It lays out your guaranteed deliverables and payment. But, as we've spent this whole explainer proving, it is definitely not an electric fence that stops you from generating risk elsewhere. You can step outside your scope whenever you want, but you are bringing your liability right along with you.
And then we have voluntarily assumed. This literally means choosing to perform a task outside your required contractual obligations. When you see the phrase voluntarily assumed on the exam, alarm bells should go off in your head. It's a huge signal that tort law is entering the chat and that the professional standard of care is about to follow those voluntary actions like a shadow.
Finally, Section 6, the final takeaway. Let's wrap up this masterclass.
We've covered a ton of ground today, going all the way from a basic multiple choice question down to the absolute bedrock of engineering law. I really want you to take this one heuristic, write it down, and burn it into your memory. Your liability expands to match your actions, not just your contract. If you just remember that liability mirrors what you actually do on the ground and that the standard of care applies to literally any hat you decide to wear on site, you are going to effortlessly ace these civil liability questions. Before we go, I want to leave you with something to think about. What everyday tasks are you doing on site right now that might be silently expanding your professional liability? Are you giving casual, off-the-cuff advice to a contractor? Are you inspecting things outside your own discipline, just trying to be helpful? Think about this in your own daily practice, because that's how you truly master the concept. Keep bringing this level of focus to your studies, and you're going to do great. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.